My life took an unexpected and devastating turn when my daughter, Clara, decided to return home after a failed relationship. Clara had always been a difficult child, rebellious and disobedient. From a young age, she showed a tendency to get into trouble, and over the years, it only worsened. She didn't finish high school, and her return home brought with it a series of problems that would transform our lives in unimaginable ways. Since Clara came back, her home, which was once a place of peace and refuge, became an emotional battlefield. The fights and arguments were constant, and my wife, instead of trying to impose some order, seemed incapable of taking any significant action. This only made things worse. Clara knew how to manipulate her mother, making her feel guilty and responsible for any attempt at discipline. The tension in our house was palpable. Each day was a new battle, and I could barely sleep, worried about what might happen next. Clara, realizing her mother's lack of control, began bringing shady people home and committing petty thefts. I tried to intervene, but my attempts were constantly undermined by my wife's complacency and Clara's defiance. In a desperate attempt to reverse the situation, I sought external help, talking to counselors and trying to involve the school, but nothing seemed to work. Clara was determined to live her life without any responsibility or respect for family rules. The situation was unsustainable, and I knew something terrible was about to happen. The constant stress began affecting my health. I felt a permanent weight on my chest, as if waiting for an explosion that would destroy everything around us. The arguments with my wife became more frequent and intense. I begged her to take action, but she simply couldn't or wouldn't see the gravity of the situation. The sense of powerlessness was overwhelming. I watched my family crumble before my eyes and could do nothing to stop it. My days became a sequence of tense moments, each bringing the hope that things might get better, only to be followed by the harsh reality that Clara was pushing all of us to the limit. Everything culminated in a fateful night. I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, when Clara came home later than usual, with a defiant expression on her face. My wife, as usual, said nothing, but I couldn't hold back anymore. An explosive argument followed, with Clara yelling that she had the right to do whatever she wanted, and me trying to make her understand the consequences of her actions. Her words hit me like a knife. "You don't control me. You were never truly there, so why should I care about what you think now?" Those words echoed in my mind, tearing my heart apart. I knew something had to change, but I had no idea how drastically my life was about to be turned upside down. If you like following stories, reports, and surprising revelations seen on Reddit, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. The theft and unjust imprisonment. One night, the unexpected happened. Clara was home, acting more reserved than usual, which always made me suspicious. I was in the living room, trying to relax after a long day at work when I heard a loud knock on the door. The police were there. My heart raced immediately, a premonition that something terrible was about to happen. The officers entered and began searching the house. My mind was racing, trying to understand what was happening. "We received a report of a theft," one of the officers said. "Your neighbors saw someone entering here with items that were reported stolen." His words echoed in my head as I tried to process the accusation. I looked at Clara, who was standing in the hallway, her face a mask of calculated innocence. "This is a mistake," I said, trying to stay calm. "There's nothing stolen here." The police didn't listen and continued the search. My heart sank when they found the stolen items hidden in my room. It was a surreal and unjust scene. Clara stood in the hallway, watching everything with an expression I couldn't decipher. The police handcuffed me, and I was taken away, still trying to understand how this had happened. At the station, reality began to sink in. I was being accused of a crime I didn't commit, based on evidence planted in my own home. The shock and outrage were overwhelming. I tried to explain to the officers that I had been framed, but no one seemed to believe me. The neighbors' words, who apparently saw me with the stolen items, weighed more than my claim of innocence. During the interrogation, each question felt like a blow, an attempt to break me. I maintained my innocence, but the sense of powerlessness was crushing. Why would my own daughter do this? I thought, desperate to find an explanation. The idea of Clara being involved was unbearable, but the evidence pointed in that direction. The night in the cell was endless. The cold, impersonal environment reflected the despair I felt inside. I knew my life was about to change forever, and the fear of the unknown was paralyzing. I tried to sleep, but the anxiety and dread kept me awake. I thought about my wife, how she was dealing with all this. Did she believe me? Or was she also doubting my innocence? The next day, I was taken to the preliminary hearing. My wife was there, her face marked by worry and uncertainty. Clara was also present, her expression cold and impenetrable. When the judge read the charges, it felt like the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I, an honest, hard-working man, was being accused of theft by my own daughter. "This is a mistake," I said once again, my voice laden with desperation. "I didn't do this." But the legal system didn't seem to be on my side. The evidence was damning, and my defense seemed weak in comparison. Clara was called to testify, and to my utter disbelief, she lied under oath, corroborating the neighbor's story. Each word from her was a stab in my heart, destroying any hope I had of being quickly exonerated. When the hearing ended, I was taken back to the cell. The heavy silence of the prison was interrupted only by the distant noises of other inmates. My mind was in chaos. How could my own daughter do this? I felt betrayed, devastated, powerless. Her words echoed in my head, a constant reminder of the betrayal. The only thing that kept me going was the determination to prove my innocence. I knew I needed to find a way to expose Clara and reveal the truth. But, imprisoned and without resources, this seemed like an impossible task. Each passing day diminished my hope, but I refused to give up. I needed justice, not just for myself, but to restore my honor and dignity. Trial and conviction. The trial was scheduled for a few months after my arrest, but time seemed to drag like an eternity. Each day in the cell was a mental and emotional torture. I couldn't stop thinking about Clara's betrayal and the coldness with which she had lied in court. What hurt most was the doubt in my wife's eyes. Did she believe me? Or was she convinced I was guilty? When the day of the trial finally arrived, I felt a knot in my stomach. I entered the courtroom in handcuffs, feeling everyone's eyes on me. My wife was there, sitting in the front row, her eyes swollen from crying. Clara was also present, sitting next to her, with an expression that mixed disdain and arrogance. I could see she was relishing my suffering. The prosecutor began presenting the case against me, painting me as a thief who had betrayed the trust of my own community. He brought up testimonies from neighbors who said they saw me acting suspiciously. I knew these witnesses were being manipulated, but proving it was another story. Every word from the prosecutor was like a blow to my heart, destroying any hope of being found innocent. When it was Clara's turn to testify, my heart sank even further. She took the stand and, with a frightening coldness, repeated the lies she had already told. "Yes, I saw my father hiding the stolen items in the room," she said, without hesitation. Her voice was firm and convincing, and I could see the doubt in the jurors' eyes. My lawyer did his best to expose Clara's lies, but the lack of concrete evidence in my favor made everything more difficult. He tried to show inconsistencies in the witnesses' stories, but the prosecutor was prepared for everything. Every argument my lawyer presented was quickly refuted, and I could feel the case slipping away. When the judge finally asked the jury to retire to deliberate, the silence in the courtroom was overwhelming. Each minute that passed felt like an eternity. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, hoping for a miracle that never came. When the jury returned, their faces were expressionless. The verdict was unanimous: guilty. The sentence was a devastating blow. 12 years in prison. The words echoed in the courtroom, and I felt like my world was collapsing around me. I looked at my wife, hoping to find some sign of support, but all I saw was doubt and confusion. Clara, on the other hand, seemed satisfied. Her triumphant look told me everything I needed to know. She had won. As I was led back to the cell, I felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and helplessness. My life, which I had worked so hard to build, had been destroyed by a cruel lie. I knew Clara had framed me, but proving it seemed an impossible task. The pain of being betrayed by my own daughter was unbearable, but I refused to give up. Determined to find a way to expose Clara and reveal the truth, I swore to myself that I wouldn't let her get away with it. The first days in prison were a nightmare. The environment was hostile, and I was constantly harassed by other inmates. They saw me as an easy target, someone who didn't belong there. Fights were frequent, and I had to learn to defend myself quickly. Each day was a struggle for survival, both physically and emotionally. The isolation was the worst part. My visits were rare and tense. My wife came occasionally, but the distance between us only grew. She seemed torn between the love she still felt for me and the doubt planted by Clara's lies. Each time she visited, I hoped to see some sign of support, but all I received were empty looks and words of resignation. The nights in prison were long and lonely. I spent hours lying on my bed, thinking about everything that had happened. Clara's betrayal, my wife's lack of support, the injustice of the judicial system. Each thought was a knife in my heart, increasing my determination to prove my innocence. I knew I needed to find a way to expose Clara and reveal the truth, but each passing day made this task seem more impossible. Life in prison began to take a toll on my mental health. The constant stress, the lack of hope, the feeling of being trapped in a never-ending nightmare. I began having frequent nightmares, reliving the day of the trial and Clara's betrayal. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest, knowing that the only way out of that situation was to fight for justice. I started writing letters to my wife, trying to explain my feelings and my innocence, but rarely received replies. The feeling of isolation only grew, and I knew I needed to find a way to stay strong. I began reading law books in the prison library, learning about the judicial system, and looking for any loophole that could help me prove my innocence. Each day, my determination grew. I knew Clara had lied, and the truth was out there, waiting to be discovered. I couldn't let her destroy my life without a fight. Despite the pain, anger, and despair, I held on to the hope that one day justice would prevail. And as I waited for that day, I continued to fight, each day bringing me one step closer to exposing the truth and restoring my life. Life in prison and reflection. Life in prison was a living hell. Each day was a battle for survival and maintaining my sanity. The hostile environment and constant threat of violence made everything even more difficult. In the beginning, I was a constant target of harassment and threats. The other inmates saw in me a broken man, an easy target for their frustrations and anger. In the first weeks, I suffered several assaults. One night, I was attacked by a group of inmates while sleeping. I woke up to punches and kicks, trying to defend myself, but the numerical disadvantage was overwhelming. I was taken to the infirmary, where doctors treated my wounds. While lying on the cot, the physical pain was intense, but the emotional pain was even worse. Clara's betrayal, my wife's doubt, and the injustice of the judicial system weighed on me like a stone. Even so, I refused to give up. Over time, I learned to defend myself and gain respect among the other inmates. I made strategic alliances and avoided conflicts whenever possible. But the violence was constant, and I never knew when I would be attacked again. The feeling of always being on alert was exhausting, but necessary for survival. The days were long and repetitive. I spent most of my time in the prison library, reading law books and writing letters to my wife, trying to explain my innocence and my determination to prove the truth. Her responses were rare and full of doubt, but I clung to any sign of hope. One of the few things that kept me sane was the friendship with another inmate, Carlos. He was serving a long sentence for a crime he admitted to committing, but he believed in my innocence. Carlos became a friend and counselor. He taught me how to survive in prison and encouraged me never to stop fighting for justice. "You can't let her win," he said one day while we were sitting in the prison yard. "You need to keep fighting, no matter how hard it is." Carlos's words gave me strength. I knew he was right. I couldn't let Clara destroy my life without a fight. I started planning ways to expose the truth and clear my name. Each day was a step toward my goal, even if it seemed impossible. During the lonely nights in the cell, my mind wandered between painful memories and plans for the future. I remembered the happy moments with my family, before everything fell apart. The laughter, the hugs, the promises. Everything now seemed like a distant life, a dream destroyed by betrayal and lies. But I also thought about ways to prove my innocence. I wrote letters to lawyers, human rights organizations, and even journalists, hoping that someone would hear my story and want to help. Most of the responses were negative, but occasionally, I received a message of encouragement that renewed my determination. The feeling of isolation was overwhelming. My wife rarely visited, and when she did, the tension between us was palpable. I saw the doubt in her eyes, and it hurt more than anything else. I tried to explain, beg for her trust, but it seemed like words were not enough to break the barrier of distrust created by Clara. "I know it's hard to believe me," I said during a particularly painful visit, "but I swear I'm innocent." Clara set this all up. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I want to believe you, but everything points to the contrary." "I'm so confused, John. Please don't give up on me," I pleaded. "I will prove the truth. I just need time." My wife's visits became less frequent, and I knew I was losing her. Each time she left, a piece of my heart shattered. The emotional isolation was almost unbearable, but I refused to give up. I needed to prove my innocence, not just for myself, but for my family. Each day in prison brought new challenges. I had to deal with the hostility of the guards, who often abused their power. They saw in me a common prisoner, someone they could treat with disdain. But I kept my head held high, even when the injustice seemed overwhelming. Through all the difficulties, I kept hope alive. I knew I needed to find a way to expose the truth and seek justice. The determination to clear my name gave me strength to face each new day. I wrote down in detail everything I remembered about the case, hoping to find a clue, a detail that could be used in my favor. One day, while reviewing my notes, something caught my attention. I remembered a conversation I had with Clara before the incident. She mentioned a friend who was involved in illegal activities. I thought that maybe he could be involved in the conspiracy to frame me. I decided to investigate this lead, even though it would be difficult to obtain information from inside the prison. I sent letters to some old contacts, asking for help in finding out more about this friend of Clara. I knew it was a long shot, but I had to try. Each step toward the truth gave me new hope, a new reason to keep fighting. The months passed slowly, but the hope of proving my innocence never disappeared. I continued to read, write, and plan. The friendship with Carlos gave me strength, and his words of encouragement were a beacon in the darkness. Life in prison was a constant battle, but I refused to give up. Clara's betrayal was an open wound, but the determination to expose the truth and clear my name gave me strength to keep going. I knew the road would be long and difficult, but I was willing to face any challenge to restore my honor and dignity. The path to freedom and the plan. After years of enduring the hellish conditions in prison, I finally found a sliver of hope. A lawyer from a human rights organization took an interest in my case. She believed in my innocence and was determined to help me prove it. Together, we began gathering new evidence and re-examining the case. We discovered that Clara's friend, the one involved in illegal activities, had a criminal record. This was a breakthrough. We managed to track him down, and under pressure, he admitted to helping Clara plant the stolen items in my room. This confession was the turning point. With the new evidence, my lawyer filed for a retrial. It was a long and arduous process, but eventually, the court agreed to re-examine my case. The retrial was scheduled, and for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. The day of the retrial was nerve-wracking. I walked into the courtroom, my heart pounding. My lawyer presented the new evidence, including the confession of Clara's friend. The prosecution tried to discredit the confession, but it was too solid to be dismissed. After days of testimony and deliberation, the judge finally announced the verdict. The evidence presented clearly shows that the defendant was wrongfully accused and convicted. All charges against him are hereby dropped. He is free to go. I was finally free. The feeling of relief and vindication was overwhelming. I walked out of the courtroom, a free man, determined to rebuild my life. Confronting Clara. As I walked out the prison gates, I breathed the fresh air of freedom for the first time in years. My feelings were conflicted. I was free, but the weight of injustice still hung over me. I tried to mentally prepare myself to face my family, especially Clara, who was still living in my house. The drive back was silent, each mile bringing me closer to the inevitable confrontation. When I got home, I found everything different. The walls that once housed happy moments now seemed cold and strange. My wife was not there to greet me, which was no surprise. Our bonds had weakened during my forced absence. I entered the house with a sense of discomfort, as if I were a stranger in my own life. Clara was in the living room watching TV. When she saw me, her face contorted into a look of surprise and disdain. "Dad, you're back?" she asked, her voice dripping with irony. "Yes, I'm back," I replied, trying to stay calm. "We need to talk." She raised an eyebrow as if she couldn't care less. "About what?" "You already paid for what you did." Her words hit me like a knife. "I paid for something I didn't do, Clara. And you know that." She laughed, a cold, soulless laugh. "You think anyone will believe you?" I did what I had to do. My anger rose, but I tried to keep control. "You destroyed my life, Clara. I spent years in prison for something you did." She shrugged, as if it were nothing. "That's not my problem. You were in the way." Her coldness was unbelievable. I knew I needed to do something to expose the truth. Unbeknownst to her, I had placed a small recorder in my pocket before entering. I needed her confession, and I knew provoking her was the only way to get it. "Do you really feel no guilt?" I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. Clara looked me straight in the eye, her gaze defiant. "No. I'd do it all again if I had to." I was ready to explode with anger, but I knew I had to stay calm to get the full confession. "So you admit you planted the stolen items in my room? That you manipulated everything to frame me?" She hesitated for a moment, but her arrogance won out. "Yes, I did. And it was the best decision I made. You deserved it." With that confession, my heart sank. I had the proof I needed. The pain of hearing the truth from her mouth was almost unbearable, but it also gave me the strength I needed to move forward. "You're going to pay for this, Clara." "I swear," I said, my voice firm. She just laughed again, but I knew I now had the power to change my situation. I went straight to my lawyer, bringing the recording with me. He listened to Clara's confession, his face serious and determined. "We have what we need," he said. "This will turn the tide." The process to bring Clara to justice began immediately. My lawyer filed a legal case, presenting the recording as evidence of my innocence and Clara's guilt. The case gained attention quickly, and the news spread. My daughter, who once felt untouchable, now faced the consequences of her actions. The court date was set for a few months later. During that time, my relationship with my wife continued to deteriorate. She was torn between loyalty to her daughter and guilt for doubting me. I knew our marriage probably wouldn't survive all this, but I was determined to see Clara held accountable. On the day of the trial, the courtroom was packed. The media was present, and all eyes were on Clara. When the recording was played in court, the reaction was immediate. There was a murmur of shock and outrage in the room. Clara tried to maintain her arrogant composure, but I could see the worry in her eyes. My lawyer presented the case masterfully, highlighting all of Clara's inconsistencies and manipulations. The prosecutors, once so confident in their case, were now on the defensive. The recorded confession was irrefutable evidence. When the judge finally announced the verdict, a tense silence filled the courtroom. "Clara, you are guilty of manipulating the judicial system and falsely incriminating your father. You will be fined $200,000 and face a period of incarceration." The judge's words were a relief. Justice was finally being served. Clara was taken into custody, her look of fear finally revealing the gravity of her actions. The sense of justice prevailing was indescribable. However, the victory had a bitter taste. My wife couldn't cope with the truth and decided to leave. Our marriage, already fragile, didn't survive the impact. I was free, and my innocence had been proven, but the cost was high. How will the narrator rebuild his life after this devastating experience? Keep watching to discover the next steps in his journey towards peace and redemption. Legal preparation for revenge. Determined to expose Clara and clear my name, I began planning my legal revenge. I knew I needed irrefutable evidence, so I decided to record Clara's confession. I waited patiently for a moment when I could capture her admission without her suspecting. One night, I hid a recorder in the living room and provoked Clara about the past. "Clara, do you remember when all this started? When you decided to ruin my life?" She laughed, unaware of the recording. "Of course I remember. It was too easy. You were so desperate to believe I had changed. So you admit you planted those stolen items in my room?" I asked, keeping my calm while my heart raced. "Yes, I admit it. And I'd do it again if I had to," she replied, without remorse. With the confession recorded, I went straight to a renowned lawyer in town. He listened to the recording attentively, and when he finished, he looked at me seriously. "We have a solid case here. We can sue Clara for defamation and manipulating the judicial system. And there's also the possibility of a lawsuit against the government for wrongful imprisonment." The prospect of finally getting justice brought new hope. We began preparing the case, gathering all necessary evidence and outlining our strategy. Will the narrator get justice after years of suffering? Watch the next chapter to see how he will present the evidence and face Clara in court. Judgment Day. The day of the trial arrived, and the tension was palpable. Clara was in court, accompanied by her lawyers, still with the same disdainful expression. When it was my turn to speak, I presented the recording of the confession. The room fell silent as Clara's words echoed, admitting her crimes. Clara's lawyers were speechless. The judge, visibly impacted, listened to the recording to the end before pausing. This recording is clear evidence that you were wrongfully accused. Clara, your actions are despicable and unacceptable. I declare all charges against you null and void and order Clara to be prosecuted for defamation and manipulating the judicial system. The decision was an indescribable relief. Finally, my innocence was recognized. Clara was ordered to pay a substantial fine and face her own legal consequences. What will be the consequences for Clara, and how will the narrator rebuild his life? Keep watching to find out. Consequences for the daughter. The sentence against Clara caused a great commotion in the community. She became a target of social isolation and ostracism, with old friends and neighbors avoiding any contact. The pressure on her was immense, and for the first time, it seemed she was reaping what she had sown. I, on the other hand, began to rebuild my life. I used the financial compensation to cover legal costs and start over. I got a new job and went back to studying, determined to make up for lost time. How will the narrator rebuild his life after this ordeal? Keep watching for more emotional stories of resilience and justice. Rebuilding and conclusion. With the weight of injustice finally lifted, I began to focus on my future. Each day was an opportunity to start over, and I was determined to make the most of it. My new life was full of challenges, but also of renewed hope and determination. The story of my struggle and triumph inspired positive changes in the judicial system, highlighting the importance of holding those who distort justice accountable. Despite the lost time, I found new meaning in life, emphasizing resilience and the importance of justice. If you enjoyed following this story, don't forget to leave a like. And if you want to follow more stories, reports, and surprising revelations seen on Reddit, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. It will be a pleasure to have you with us.